Thank you very much for joining us today. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everybody who's joining us on this third episode of Securing the Digital Supply Chain. My name is Anirban. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Viscosity. And with us today, we have a star-studded list of two very well-known individuals in the Bay Area that I have had the honor of working with. The first person is my brother-in-arms from Cloudflare, Ken Carter, who was the man who handled everything legal stuff, general counsel, everything at Cloudflare. Ken, welcome to the show. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you. It was such a warm introduction. I was looking around. Who is he talking about?
Oh, and also the second person is Jacob Elziq. Jacob and I met many years ago. Jacob owns Armature Systems. He's a very well-known personality in the Bay Area. He helps companies develop software, install software, manage the entire IT and security technology lifecycle process. Jacob, thank you very much for being a supporter and for joining us today on this show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Wonderful, wonderful, gentlemen. Um, there are a couple of questions that people who know about the show have already submitted, and they've talked to us. They would like the answers that you have and the perspective that you have on various things. The way we'll do this is essentially we'll go through the questions one by one, and let's have a free form discussion on how your perspectives, where you see the world is going to, and in that direction. So the first one, before we jump in to the questions and whatnot, it would be helpful. I know you both very well, but Ken, it might be helpful for people to get just a little bit of an introduction about your professional background, where you are right now, your focus areas of interest. That would be wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm currently general counsel to Bitmovin. Bitmovin provides video solutions for internet developers. So for streaming content, if you want to encode or play back video on the internet. Been with the company 3.5 years, and I'm responsible for all legal matters in front of the company. A lot of my work includes not just like straight up legal work, but also building, developing, and deploying technology that makes our jobs easier. So I'm a early adopter and keen fanatic for all things legal tech and adjacent tech that just makes my job easier.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. Jacob, could I please ask you to give a little introduction about yourself too?
Yeah, just brief work history, I guess, and background. Started my career at Juniper Networks, doing customer escalations, managing uh, uh, their access escalations for their access business unit. So that's helping large companies help safely connect workers to corporate infrastructure so they could do their work safely. And then kind of how do you tie policy to identity, right? So making sure people get the right access for their job based off their job function. So I started my career really early in cybersecurity. Founded Armature Systems back in 2013 to really help large companies safely connect people and data together, no matter where the people go or no matter where the data goes, right? So very strong understanding of how large companies work, right? And the challenges they face when trying to secure the way they work, right?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And again, thank you to you both for joining us today. We'll jump into some of the questions. So one of the areas that we have seen morph very quickly in the last 5 years is definitely legal technology. And Ken, since you've been observing and being in this, you have been in this area for some time. From your perspective, what are some of the fundamental changes from a technology perspective that have happened in the legal side of things?
Yeah. So the trends that are happening in this market space now are sort of the development of software tools that allow you to create contracts from a set of business and legal rules. So you build this into the software, you set up your rules and your priorities, and then a business user will come into the software and say, I would like this contract, and answer maybe a series of questions, fill in some data about the contract, and the software will churn and produce the data. That saves us an inordinate amount of time in terms of just producing documents. It also gives us consistency so that we can build a scalable business, and just makes things easier and more predictable. Run a business 24/7, follow the sun, and the lawyer doesn't have to be up all night. Um, uh, and it just allows us to generate really good contracts, create them, share them, negotiate them, sign them, and then have them in a way in which we can start to understand our legal rights and obligations in a systematic way.
Very nice. And um, Jacob, since your company, Armature, and you are helping customers across all spectrums, if I'm not right, you have, if I'm not wrong, you have customers who are very large, you have customers that are in the mid market, you have customers in the SMB area. Um, Based on, like, as Ken is saying, that there have been fundamental changes in his area of expertise from the legal side of things, do you see some similarities in technologies that have really proliferated in the last 5 years, and why they have happened across all these striations of companies, big, medium, small, any of those?
Yeah. So a lot of the folks that we work with and interact with day to day are either on infosec teams, cybersecurity teams, DevSecOps teams. So oftentimes when Carter is trying to look for the data, right, so that he could draw up the right contract, right, oftentimes people don't have that information readily available. So that ends up becoming a task or a ticket, right, or something that gets escalated directly to the security teams or their DevSecOps teams, right?
Yes.
And they have to, okay, so for instance, Log4j, right? Lawyers, people in legal want to know, where are we exposed? How much, what is our actual risk, right?
Yep.
But we got to find out how we're using Log4j throughout our organization. You just don't have a sheet that says, hey guys, this is where Log4j is installed, and this is where most of the times people don't even know what they're using. Most of the times they don't know how they're using that, and then respectively, when I say that, I meant third party software that people will often use. A lot of times it's you're scrambling to do the search, right? So it's a combination of scripts. They could have some in-house tools that may have that information, but it's not readily available. And then you may not be covering your entire basis, right? So you may not be searching all the right areas within your business. And that's a big problem for a lot of the folks that I work with. And they're constantly having to answer those questions.
Thank you. And then, Jacob, based on what you said, when we look at large companies or when we look at small companies, do you see this as a pervasive problem across companies, or is it that a specific sector or a specific type of company is more affected?
To be honest, I see almost all companies being affected one way or another. So if you're a smaller company, a startup, it's your job to grow the company.
Yes.
Right. And you cannot grow the company if you cannot acquire customers. And what we're starting to see is the larger companies these smaller companies are trying to sell to, right? It's often the case. Not every company is a consumer-based company, right? There's enterprise-grade companies.
Yes.
If they can't prove that their own house is in order, right? That they can respond from a risk perspective to these large customers, they'll never be able to acquire them as a customer in the first place, right? So they're scrambling to have to answer these questions in the middle of the sales cycle, right?
Correct.
And if I'm the customer, that doesn't make me really reassured, right? I'm not really sure. Maybe I didn't pick the right company if they can't answer these basic questions. Maybe it's too risky to do business with them. And on the flip side, right, the larger companies that we work with, they have regulations they have to meet, right? Because they sell to all different types of industries. They may be selling in different continents, right? And they have to have that information readily available for every place they grow their business and every place they do business. So it's the same. They both have that problem of having to get that information, but it's for different reasons.
Wonderful. Ken, I'd like to pull a thread from what Jacob mentioned, that from a legal standpoint, how important is it for a general counsel or the legal team to have visibility and ownership on what data are we exchanging with third parties?
It's absolutely essential. And lawyers traditionally have this weird relationship with information and disseminating information, right? Lawyers are bound by attorney-client privilege, right? We're not allowed to share certain kinds of information except under limited circumstances. So by our professional training, we are averse to sharing any kind of information. It's like none of your goddamn business. That's the answer. So, and you can never be 100% certain whether or not something's privileged or it's a secret.
Yep.
And the consequences are dire, and therefore the individual attorney, right? If a regular employee just discloses something they're not supposed to, get in a lot of trouble, they lose their job,
Correct.
right? I could not just lose my job. I could lose my law license. And I could lose the ability to get another job and provide for my family. So there is a natural sort of ingrained reticence of sharing any information. Now, you can't run a business that way. You can't go through life that way. It's just not possible.
Right.
So you have to develop systems for sharing the right information to the right person at the right time under the right conditions. No more, no less. Because if you're holding back and someone needs to know something to conclude a contract, as Jacob mentioned, you'll lose the deal, right? But if you disclose the wrong thing, you could lose your job. So
Yes.
getting this critically right and doing this in advance in a thoughtful and methodical kind of way is super important, because doing it on the fly, I don't want to do that.
Yep.
I lose my law license.
And then from what you said, how important is it, or how would you approach? So what you talked about is at the time of signing a contract, at the time of consummating a business deal, we obviously have these concerns in mind. But once that is done, oftentimes companies continue to exchange data with third parties, whether it is API data, whether it is PII, PHI, anything of that sort. What does, from a legal standpoint, how do you effectively manage that relationship where you're constantly exchanging data with these third parties?
Yeah, you have to enter into those agreements with an understanding of what you're exchanging and when.
Yes.
And then you have to monitor that to make sure that you are in fact doing all of these things. And what class of data do you have? Is it a sensitive data? Is sharing it okay? Or is not sharing it not okay? And so you need to do this in a sort of methodical way. You need to set up rules for doing this. The GDPR is now coming on 4 years, and that really changed the way in which businesses exchange information and the contracts and the agreements and the nature in which they do that. You need to have a set of rules. You need to promise to the other side that this is the kind of data that you're collecting. And it may not be standard with other vendors, right? Other vendors are collecting different kinds of information.
Right.
So how do you express that in a consistent way? How do you do that in a way that gives you a competitive advantage? All these things get really complex very, very quickly. And that's just in the contracting phase. What happens if, heaven forfend, you have some sort of data breach or other problem where you have to disclose that you might have had an error? How do you do that? That's another set of nightmares.
Yep. Very true. Very true. Jacob, since you are dealing with many companies at the same time, Ken's original point that the areas that were in legal tech, there has been a significant change is in terms of automation. That what we used to do in terms of writing things down, talking to people, it has been automated to a degree to help people get things done faster in a more reliable manner. Where have you seen in other areas that automation has had a good effect, or maybe has not performed as well as it was touted to be in the companies that you have talked to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there. So I mean, in areas where I've found automation to be effective. So just maybe I should clarify the type of automation that we focus on and we do in Armature Systems, because you really can apply automation to every aspect of a business. But specifically for us, it tends to be around operations and security.
Yes.
However, a lot of the workflows that we develop, right? So let's say a ticket comes in, let's say a DMCA request comes in, right?
Yes.
Very common request, right? It starts with legal, right? So legal is notified, then there's probably another ticket that gets generated, say, hey, we need to notify the user that, of what's going on or what's expected to go on, make sure that the user has rectified the problem, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
You got to validate that it's been verified, and you have to get back to legal, right? So, a lot of times that's pulling data, it's emailing users, it's contacting them, validating a few pieces of information with legal, and then now the issue can be resolved and legal can finish closing out the job, right? So a lot of times it's, yes, we're doing something for the security team or operational team, but it has effects with HR, there could be effects with legal and whatnot. So in those types of respects where the information is dependable and you know where the information is, so because a lot of times automation, you're pulling variables, right?
Correct.
Or data from one source or another, and if everything depends on the accuracy of that information. And if that information is inaccurate, then the automation is actually doing the complete opposite. Rather than helping you be more productive and get tasks done, it's making you do the wrong thing faster.
Correct.
Right. So I've seen it fail when the data sources weren't dependable.
That is a very good way to describe it. And from the DMCA side of things, I mean, going back to that entire part of GDPR also, I think the DMCA request is kind of similar in that vein to also GDPR request to be forgotten, because then there is also that same workflow that has to be followed where somebody is requesting their information to be removed from the company. Who will remove it? Who are our data processors? Who do we go to as a secondary level third-party vendor and say, hey, you have to remove the data too? So right about that, unless you have that data on good data on what do we need to do, is this reliable or not, automation just around it won't help, because there's this constant thing of like, just in the Bay Area, oftentimes we hear just automate, keep automating and this and that, but automating blind, it's like flying blind if you don't have good backup.
It's a really scary thing to think about. If you if you heavily depend on automation and you automate just about everything, things can go awry very, very quickly, just as things can function smoothly. So it's
let's hope the T1000, the T800s don't come by due to all this automation. Ken, we're talking about this automation and doing various types of things. Through this automation also, we are constantly exchanging data with these third parties, whatever it might be. For a large company, there might be many resources that they can throw at the problem. They have a big team, they have money and all that stuff. For SMBs, are there a couple of nuggets that they can do from a legal perspective that would help them stay safe when they have integrations to various third parties, but they don't necessarily have a huge team to keep an eye on every single piece of data that's exchanging boundaries and they're sharing with their own third parties for services?
Yeah, I think you need to start by looking in and not to the vendor. I think if you're coming into a company, you're starting a company, you need to do a data audit, and you need to sit down with the product and the engineering folks.
Yes.
And understand in a very technical way and translate, technology to legal, legal to technology, phrase book kind of stuff. Yes. What it is that you're collecting, where do you store it? How long do you keep it? What's the fastest you can get rid of?
Yes.
Yes. You never leak data that you don't have.
Yes.
Do you need to keep it? If it's not fresh, get rid of it.
Yes.
And once you've sort of organized all of that, then you can go to an annual audit. Has anything changed? If you're developing new features and new products and features,
yes,
can you interject before that product goes live a review of any new data or classes of information that are being collected or stored? And you've got to do that on an annual basis or on a new product release basis. And then once you know the kinds of things that you have, you'll understand what it is that you're exchanging to other people, because you can't give away what you don't have.
Okay.
And you're unlikely to buy something that you don't need. And you want to, when you're looking at the vendors, what of these pools of data that I've identified in my data audit, what does this relate to? And you'll be able to understand your needs and asks for your vendors. Like, no, I don't want you sending me that information. I do not want that unleased, or I want it in the aggregate.
Right.
And if you're the vendor, the customer may be sending you information, and the answer might be no, 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 don't ever send that to me. Under no circumstances do I want that.
Correct.
And I've negotiated a standard contract say don't send us personal information. We don't want it.
Correct. So like a company that is sharing data with its third parties, if we take Log4j aside, because that is relatively still ongoing and all that stuff, it starts from SolarWinds as an example, Kaseya, all these types of things. In the companies that you've helped set up their infrastructure and all that, what are some of the other examples that you've seen that they have struggled with from a third-party perspective?
So I guess the biggest struggle that I interact with mostly, right? So most of the folks I work with are in security, or sometimes engineering. I would say more so. It's becoming. We're having more discussions with engineering. So the big problem that we constantly see is, the security side of the business is responsible for protecting, the infrastructure that's running, that's generating revenue for the business, whatever it may be, right? So it could be Spotify's cloud presence, it could be Pinterest's cloud presence, or whoever, right? So if their stuff isn't up and running and doing what it's supposed to, they're not collecting, their subscribers aren't paying for the service, right? So the business comes to the cybersecurity side and says, hey, you're responsible for protecting this, right? It's your job to keep this up and running. It's your job to make sure we don't lose our customers' data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
Then security will go right back to the executives and say, dude, I don't make the product. You want me to secure this, and I have no say in how the product's built, what parts are used, and you want me to protect it, and I don't even know what you guys are putting into it, right? Correct. And I constantly I don't know what to look for. There's an infinite amount of vulnerabilities that will exist, right? Anytime you make something, and inevitably it will be, someone will eventually find a vulnerability into it, right? Until it's patched, right? Correct. I don't think anyone puts their hat out there and says, I make 100% safe software that's invulnerable. Right? So what happens is the cyber side of the business has to go back and say, okay, let's just find out what's out there, right? Yes. And then dev is like, okay, you're going to tell me what's out there, and then I'm going to make a change. But what's going to happen a quarter from now when the next version or the next update comes out, right? Is there going to be this constant flow of information between the security side and the engineering side? And that's often not the case, just because of politically just how companies operate, right? Yes. You don't want someone's nose in your stuff, right? And you don't want people saying that, hey, these guys are making insecure code and whatnot. That there's always that fear, but I believe it has to be a fully collaborative approach, right? Meaning dev and cyber and the security side of the business, if they're not working in harmony, you're just never going to be able to get in front of problems before they happen, right? And you won't be able to address those problems when it does hit the fan, right? It's not that a lot of people were, hit by all these vulnerabilities that we talk about, but it's how effectively can you respond to it once it happens, which is, I think, the most important thing. Right?
Correct. And I think you brought up an interesting point where in a lot of organizations, there are silos in terms of security is a silo, ops is a silo, dev is a silo. Do you see that the more as time goes by, there's more cross-pollination going on? Like we now have DevSecOps, SecDevOps, SecOps. There's enough terms out there in the world.
Well, I think it's getting better, right? Because I think people are understanding that security has to be a part of the way we do everything, the way we build and bring products and ideas and services to life. If we're not building it with security in mind, right? Not just from making it a secure product out the gate, right? But it's also about the process in which we're going to be improving the software over time, right? The CI/CD pipeline, continuous improvement, continuous development. Within that infinite loop, there has to be a security process that goes right along with it, right?
Correct. No, absolutely makes sense. Ken, from a from the ramifications of compliance standards that are there, privacy-oriented standards. California implemented CCPA's, CPRA, GDPR is already there. From these compliance standards perspective, what are some of the risks that people should be worried about when they talk to these third-party vendors and exchange data with them?
Yeah, so just as a reminder, a law like GDPR is a European law written by a committee in their second and third languages to apply to companies like Google and Facebook, right? And they have this overexpansive reach that gets down to every
Yeah.
company that
Yep.
has data on the internet. And the consequences of getting this wrong can be end of company bad.
Yes.
Right? The European data regulator could use the same fining mechanism that it would use against Google or Facebook to basically fine your company out of existence.
Yes.
The California law, maybe not so much. But first off, when you by necessity have to enter into a data protection agreement, a DPA, and those laws have changed in the last 6 months, and you have now a palette of DPAs that you can use as opposed to one size fits all. If the other side is not ready to pull one of these out or not ready to look at yours, you just walk away.
Yeah.
And sometimes it surprises our customers when I say, send me your DPA. I guarantee you we're going to sign it. Minimal, if any, changes.
Yes.
They're all very standard. They're all at 4 years on now. Everything sort of works in a consistent kind of way. I've never seen anything really crazy in a DPA that I could, no, we can't do this under any circumstances. So if they're not ready to sign yours or send you theirs, you walk away. For the California law, there are weird, interesting wrinkles that can get you in trouble if someone is using your software to violate the privacy rights of your customer's customer. You are on the hook for that. You can have
Interesting.
liability.
Interesting.
So one of the things that we added to our privacy policies, you can't use the software to violate
somebody
CCPA.
else's. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to honor all the signals that you promised to honor.
Yes.
We thought about this, and we couldn't think of a circumstance in which one of our customers could use our software in this way.
Yep.
We put it in anyway.
Yep.
Because what if they're smarter than we are? Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't cost anything, and if our customer is not going to agree to that,
yeah,
I don't think I want that as a customer.
If you have concerns about the usage of the software, yes.
Right, because remember, the consequences are end of company bad.
Correct.
And these are not particularly onerous agreements. Once you've read reading the first one is awful.
Yes.
Once you've read the first data privacy agreement, data protection agreement, and you get your head around it, and you know what the model clauses say, you can't change the model clauses. All right, let's just assume that we have this in place, because it's not going to change our behavior, because we're not going to treat the data with any less security than we would normally.
Yep.
And let's just not risk the company for this. Let's just sign it and get on to the next thing.
Absolutely. And what are your thoughts on? It seems like literally now every other country is coming out with their own data protection version law. So India is coming out with one, China is coming out with one, Brazil is coming out with one.
Yeah. Look, if you quote unquote don't do business in these places, there's still gravitational effect, right? Because you may someday want to be localized in those countries, and if you're breaking the law from outside, okay, you might not get in trouble now, but it forecloses the market to you.
Right.
All of these the GDPR is the gold standard. Not to polish the law, it's like I said, it's written by committee. But that's kind of, they all will establish a minimum level of legal requirements. And if you are in compliance with the most restrictive, the minimum requirements,
right,
you're probably pretty close with the rest of those.
Nice. Very nice. Thank you. Jacob, for the customers that you're helping, Obviously they have concerns in compliance, they need help with just the development, deployment, many different areas. What from your service portfolio, what are some of the services that a client can pick and choose from, which would help them in resolving this software supply chain overarching issue?
Yeah. So I mean, you know, we we provide full, we consulting services around how, you know, how you, how you develop software and maintain software, right? And service software and its users. There has to be a method in which you're securing the entire process, right? So
Yes.
you're securing the building blocks that you're using for that software. You're securing the software and the process in which you use to push it to production, right? To whatever cloud provider you may be choosing.
Correct.
You have to secure the process in which you maintain that software, right? So maintenance releases, right? Patches, right? Are you doing, are you regression testing, right? For certain things from a security perspective, not just functionality, right? And oftentimes a lot of organizations miss that or skip that, right? So I would say, the consultative approach that we take in helping customers build everything safely is probably, the fastest growing, part of my business, right? And that's generally why, Riskosity is so appealing to my organization, right? So if we can at least start with a baseline of, okay, here's what you have today, right? So anytime you go do any consulting engagement, you have to do an assessment to see what is your process, what's out there today. Let's first get you into a functional state, right? So your business can continue to hum along, continue to sign customers, to keep people in legal happy, right? To keep your auditors happy, right? I think that's always on everyone's top of mind, but there's the next part, which is what about next year's audit? What about the next request that comes in? How are you going to start solving that problem consistently, right? As your organization grows, contracts, changes personnel, right? A lot of times that stuff gets lost, right? And people just never get to it because the processes never get established in a way that's sustainable, right? So,
Yep. And it's this entire thing, you're right, it's this entire thing of, run lean, and there are benefits to that. But when you run lean, this entire tribal knowledge that stays with one person and whatnot, it is such a huge issue, because as people leave, as they come in, human beings in transferring information via verbal mechanisms are so poor at doing this, that this entire knowledge is, how can we transfer it in 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week to somebody that you've gathered over years of working in a specific company? And whether we like it or not, the pressure is always to push the product out, close the deal, more revenue, etc. Documentation oftentimes takes a backseat. That's the reality of what we see in most organizations. So you have a very valid point that, it's not a question of just what's there now. It has to be a constant effort, and you can't just depend on one team to kind of do it. It cannot be. It has to be a cross-functional effort over there to make it a success. Absolutely. Ken, as Jacob and I talked about that, from an employee churn perspective, things can be difficult. What is your perspective? How do you see that when employees come and leave? How do you handle the exchange of information? What impact does it have?
Yes. So actually, this is a place where automation can be really, really helpful. And in fact, this is an issue that I just dealt with this very morning. So we had 2 employees who both left about 2 years ago, who we recruited back on Monday. They started back with the company on Monday. We were very excited to have them. And so I sat down with them, and they were like, what do I not remember from 2 years ago? What have you changed? What do I need to know to do my job? And I said, you need to know 3 words. You need to know contract, you need to know additional terms and conditions, and you need to know help. And I showed them this chatbot that I had built with the help of a couple of law students, that guides them to the right contract, gets them the right terms, and gives them help on how to do this. And it's all in an automated fashion. It all runs in workflows for Slack.
Wow.
And just guides them through a series of questions to get them what they need. And I don't have to train my sales reps, and nobody has to remember anything, including me. and I can use it to get to the same answer so that I give consistent legal advice every single time.
Ken, you
And
gotta admit you're going over to the dark side with all your coding and whatnot and chatbots. I mean,
I'm actually learning to write code, believe it or not. It's the first time I'm writing code since 1986.
very nice, very nice, very nice. Wonderful. Gentlemen, I would like to say thank you very much to you both. I mean, we've had a great discussion and I've enjoyed it, and I'm sure our viewers are going to love this. Thank you again for your time today, and we appreciate you both being here, and we really appreciate your support. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Ken. Thank you for being
Thank you
here.
for having me.
Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.